Hello everyone. Welcome to Easy English Podcast.
Today we are talking about the Social Media Balancing Act.
Ever catch yourself scrolling and just, I don't know, kind of wondering where the time went? Like, is all this social media stuff actually good for us?
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's a question that comes up a lot, and rightfully so. I mean, we're all spending so much time on these platforms.
Exactly. And I know you've been diving deep into this topic for our deep dive today. Looking at all these articles, it seems like there's a real mix of opinions on social media's role in our lives.
Right. It's definitely not a simple black and white situation.
Yeah.
We're going to try to break it all down, though, the good, the bad, and everything in between, to try and get a clearer picture.
Perfect. So maybe we can start with the good stuff. What are some of the upsides to social media that stood out in your research?
Well, one thing that kept popping up was the connection aspect. Staying in touch with friends and family, especially when you're not in the same place. It's pretty amazing that we could just see what everyone's up to with a few taps on our phones.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I definitely wouldn't be as close with some of my friends from high school if it weren't for social media.
Exactly. And it's not just about personal connections either. Some of the articles you shared talked about how social media has become this huge learning tool and a way to stay up to date on current events.
Oh, totally. It's like having a constant stream of news and information right at your fingertips.
And there's also the whole economic side of things. You sent over a couple of articles that highlighted how many new jobs have been created because of social media. Like you've got your influencers, your social media managers, the whole digital marketing world, really.
It's crazy to think how much of an industry it's become. And we can't forget about the power it gives people to have their voices heard, right? It seems like every other day there's a new social movement gaining momentum online.
For sure. Social media has definitely become a force to be reckoned with in terms of raising awareness and mobilizing people around important issues. And it's interesting, right? Because now we're seeing this sort of duality.
What do you mean?
Well, we've got all these amazing benefits we've been talking about, but at the same time, there's a ton of research and discussion around the potential downsides of social media. Like it's not all sunshine and rainbows.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. And one of the biggest concerns that jumped out from the articles you sent was the impact on mental health.
Oh, absolutely. Several of the studies you shared pointed to a strong link between heavy social media use and increased levels of stress, anxiety, and even lower self-esteem. And I think part of that comes down to this constant pressure to present a perfect image online.
It's like everyone's trying to one-up each other with the most glamorous photos and the most exciting updates.
Yeah, and that can create a lot of social comparison and make people feel inadequate or like they're not measuring up.
And on top of that, it just feels like these platforms are designed to keep us hooked. The endless scrolling, the notifications, it's hard to break away sometimes.
You're hitting on a key point there. The way these apps are designed with their algorithms and notifications, it's like they're engineered to be addictive.
So we get caught in this cycle of checking our phones constantly, and before we know it, hours have gone by.
Right, and that can lead to what's called time displacement, where we're spending so much time on social media that we're neglecting other things in our lives, like our work, our relationships, our hobbies, even sleep.
And then there's the whole issue of privacy, which always seems to be in the news.
Yeah, it's definitely a valid concern. I mean, think about it. Every time we use social media, we're generating data about our interests, our habits, our location, and who knows what else. And a lot of that data is being collected and used by companies for targeted advertising.
It's kind of creepy when you think about it. Like, how much do these companies actually know about us?
That's a question a lot of people are asking, and it's not always clear what the answer is. And then you layer on top of that the issue of misinformation.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one. It feels like fake news and misleading content are spreading like wildfire these days.
And social media has definitely played a role in that because it allows information or misinformation to spread incredibly quickly. So it's important to be really critical of what you see online and to check your sources before you share anything.
Okay, so we've talked about the good, the bad, and the slightly unsettling. But I think the big question now is, knowing all this, what can we actually do to make our relationship with social media healthier?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
Right? And I think a lot of it comes down to being more intentional and mindful about how we use these platforms.
So not just mindlessly scrolling for hours on end.
Exactly. One practical tip that came up a lot in the articles you sent was setting screen time limits. So actually using the tools on your phone to limit how much time you spend on certain apps.
That's a good idea. I'm definitely guilty of spending way too much time on Instagram sometimes.
And even just taking regular breaks throughout the day can make a difference. Like stepping away from your phone for even a few minutes can help you reset and refocus.
Like a little digital detox.
Yeah, exactly. And another thing that can help is being more selective about who you follow. Like if there are certain accounts that always make you feel bad or stressed or envious, maybe it's time to unfollow or mute them.
So basically curating your feed to be a more positive and supportive space.
Right? Like building a digital environment that lifts you up rather than dragging you down.
Oh.
And along those same lines, being more mindful about what you post yourself is important too. Like before you hit that share button, take a moment to think about how your words might impact others. Because once something's out there on the internet, it can be hard to take it back.
It's like thinking before you speak, but for the digital age. So it's really about shifting from being a passive consumer of social media to a more active and conscious user.
Exactly. Like asking yourself why you're using it in the first place. Are you trying to learn something new, connect with someone you care about? Or are you just scrolling out of habit or boredom?
I think that's a great question for all of us to ask ourselves. So after this deep dive, after really digging into this topic, how about you? Do you think social media is having a mostly positive or negative impact on your life?
That's a tough one. Honestly, I think it's a bit of both. But I do know that I feel a lot better when I'm using it intentionally and with a purpose, rather than just letting it suck me in.
That's a really good takeaway, and I hope our listeners out there will think about that too. Maybe they can even try out some of the tips we've talked about and see how it changes their experience. It's not about cutting out social media entirely, but about using it in a way that feels good and adds value to our lives.
Absolutely. And I think that's what all this boils down to in the end.
Mhm.
Taking control of our relationship.